Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew bring you truthful, unbiased information about real agricultural concerns. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
It's Real Ag's job to present unbiased agricultural information to the consumer. Even if you had watched every show during the season, it might be difficult to make those important connections. Today on Real Ag, we walk you through those important points over this last season.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
At its core, modern agriculture is about managing resources effectively.
So irrigation is basically the applying of water to the soil to help for plant growth when rainfall and stored soil water is insufficient. So it basically is augmenting natural rainfall. In many places in the world, we have very productive farm ground that has insufficient rainfall during the growing season when the crop needs it. Also, there's areas that have periodic drought, and irrigation can be very beneficial in terms of providing enough water for optimal plant growth in these locations. Irrigation has really been around for somewhere between 6,000 8,000 years. It's mentioned in the Bible that the irrigation was necessary in some locations. Some of the earliest probably developed in Egypt around the Nile River, and then also in the Tigris-Euphrates area, what we call the Fertile Crescent. It's now part of present-day Iraq. And basically they were just diverting water from the rivers, sometimes actually just carrying the water from the rivers to smaller gardens and stuff. It could be fairly dramatic differences that might be occurring. I mean, there would be increased hunger in parts of the world, and in some places even starvation would be occurring. And when those problems start to develop, then that can lead to, strife between countries. One country has more resources than another to buy food if necessary. And so without irrigation, some of these countries would be fairly hard pressed. If we think about it, about 40% of the food that we grow in this world is through irrigation, and that's only on about 25% of the land resource. So irrigation allows us to have more food than would be possible on a smaller percentage of the land area, and we don't actually have to develop some of this this virgin land that hasn't been broken out for production yet.
The reason we do crop rotation is because by planting different crops, it naturally breaks weed cycles, insect cycles, and so it will reduce your inputs because you don't have to protect yourself near as much against weeds, disease, insects. It also spreads your workload out. So a typical rotation around here would be wheat, then we rotate to milo, and then we rotate to say soybeans. A typical rotation in this area is once we harvest the wheat, then we'll harvest the wheat in June in this area. We'll have to keep the field clean until the following June when we plant the milo. And sometime in between when we harvest the wheat and when we plant the milo, we'll apply fertilizer, and then we'll also apply what's called a pre-emergent herbicide, which is just a herbicide we go and spray on before the milo is planted, and it has a residual effect that will continue to control weeds even after the milo's up without harming the milo. And then the milo will grow June, July, August, September, October, and then we'll harvest the milo in November. after we harvest the milo in November, we will plant beans in the following May. When you grow continuous wheat, you fight cheat, bindweed, rye, all those things, and so by rotating into sorghum, it'll help control those things, so it'll actually improve your wheat yields probably, or at least make your wheat enterprise more profitable, and make more money also by growing milo.
There are basic principles in range management that we probably can talk about, and the key one of those is stalking rate. And what we mean by stalking rate is how many animals per unit area per unit time they're going to be out there in the grazing area.
Okay, stalking rate describes the level and intensity of usage of a particular pasture over a specified period of time. Any pasture that you look at will tolerate any level of grazing, okay, as long as it's short enough. In those circumstances where you see cattle maintained on native pasture year-round, it's likely that the stalking rate is conservative enough and the rancher has done careful enough planning where there's just enough cattle out there to consume the year's annual forage production and still leave an appropriate amount of residual material out there to maintain rangeland health.
So for instance, here in eastern Kansas in the Flint Hills, during the summer we might allow 7 or 8 acres per cow-calf pair for 6 months. That would be an example of a stalking rate. I go to western Kansas, of course you can't use that high of a stalking rate, so there it might be 12, 15 acres for that same cow-calf pair. But that's stalking rate, and that's the key factor. It influences animal gain as well as plant response.
Modern agriculture takes a scientific approach to improving the products you consume.
At Kansas State University, we use a lot of analytical tools to look at beef quality. One of those analytical tools we use is the Werner Bratzer shear force measurement. In that shear force, we actually cook a sample and we actually shear it across the muscle fiber to determine what the peak force is necessary to shear the sample. And what that does is it somewhat mimics the actual chewing action of the human teeth. And so we can get an analytical measurement that's very repeatable that we can use in our analysis of different meat products. We do a lot of meat research here at K-State, and in that research we generally look at sensory traits of beef, pork, and lamb is generally the species we'll work with. And in those sensory analysis sessions, we actually have individual panelists that will rank each meat product that they eat in a blind taste test format. And basically they'll look at 3 main factors, those being tenderness, juiciness, and flavor. And so we can quantitatively value the quality of each meat product based on actual human subjects. The panelists are trained so that we can get a repeatable answer from sample to sample. The types of trials that we conduct here at K-State look at all different phases of production when it comes to quality. So we may be looking at different nutritional strategies. We may be looking at new growth promoting technologies. We may also be looking at different breeds of animals. And so what we will do is we will design studies where we will put them on feed in a controlled environment and actually test those parameters by using our sensory analysis center here at K-State, as well as we will also look at the physical attributes of the products, such as how much marbling they have, what's the shear force values that they have, what kind of cook loss do we exhibit on those products.
So there are numerous muscle biologists at the universities throughout the country, and especially and to change that, throughout the world. And so the point of, I think, most of our programs is to actually explain the biology behind meat quality. For example, what in the muscle is making meat tough, whether it be collagen, the actual muscle fiber. And so that's kind of what we look at. A big thing too when it involves muscle color, looking at the actual biochemistry of that muscle, or the metabolism of the muscle, because your muscles will have different metabolisms. And based on that, you can either have a very good shelf life where the color will last a long time, or you can have a very poor shelf life where the color won't last very long. And so we kind of use molecular techniques. We use microscopes and other tools to actually explain meat quality and try to improve meat quality too. Because once you understand, the thing I always try to tell people that when I'm explaining the importance of my program, if you're going to understand the biology of the muscle, you can actually start to try to manipulate it to your advantage. You know, and I'm not saying we can make the most tender steak in the world, but you can actually try to make minor improvements that'll benefit producers and the consumer.
Modern agriculture seeks to strike a balance between production and environmental concerns.
The diets they consume today are specially formulated, and we do it on a least cost basis. In other words, we try to make it as low a cost as possible to get the largest number of eggs or the largest amount of meat we can in return. The nice thing about that is it's also environmentally friendly. If we overfeed these birds too much protein, too much energy in the ration, well, they just don't use it. And it goes through, it comes in manure. It may increase the nitrogen content of the manure or the phosphorus content, and then we go to spread it. We may be creating environmental concerns. So today we have very concise nutrition. Whatever the bird needs is only what we give it.
All along the food chain, you have insects competing with us, and they're very good at competing with us for two reasons. Number one, they're very prolific. They produce a lot of offspring in a very short period of time, and number two, they're very persistent. Their livelihood depends upon them getting to our food source. So they are going to be very persistent at getting one individual or two individuals to be successful, and then they produce a lot of offspring, and so that's why I say they are our number one competitors.
So we do have a lot of beneficial insects in the field, and these are insects that are doing good things for us. For example, lady beetles or ladybugs, I think we're all familiar with those. They play a huge role in not only our gardens, but also in field crops. They eat aphids, they feed on a lot of pest insect eggs. When you go through and spray a pesticide, for example, or an insecticide, you're going to kill those lady beetles along with everything else. So, you know, your natural control, your beneficial insects are also being destroyed.
Modern farmers, ranchers, and producers are concerned about the welfare of their animals.
And so the way that most harvest facilities and producers will handle their animals is very humanely and by designing facilities that will facilitate the ease of movement for their animals. So if we're talking about the gathering pen, when we start to put the animals in the single file line, it'll have a round type tub or a round corner so the animals can gently go around corners and not be so scared, because usually if an animal's walking up to a 90-degree turn, if you're trying to shift them to, let's say, to the right or the left, and it's a 90-degree turn, they'll usually balk, which involves you having to either prod them, kind of stick them with a stick, or kind of aggressively handle them, which happens sometimes. And so to prevent that, all packing facilities have their design where their animals are handled with the most care and the most ease of movement for those animals, and actually designed to where those animals will move naturally and what's most comfortable for them. The other thing that plants usually do is they only have a certain set of workers that are trained in humane handling, and these are the only workers that are allowed to work with those animals. And basically, if you go around all plants in the United States, is a zero tolerance policy for abuse. You know, anybody gets caught doing that, and they're probably finding a new job the next day. So, so animal handling is the most paramount thing in the industry. When animals arrive at the plant, they're usually allowed a rest period to allow them to get acclimated to the actual area. Because when the animals come off their truck, they're usually in a heightened state of awareness because they're in a new area. So most plants will put them in the pen with the animals that came with them, allow them time to rest and actually drink water and kind of rest before they go on to be harvested.
I think one of the controversial issues in pork production today is that the general public they have their vision of, old McDonald's farm where every farm has 2 pigs and they spend their time in the mud wallow, next to the big red barn. And, that's all nice and looks great in the kids' picture books, but, that's not the reality of today, because the fact of the matter is those pigs had to suffer through, ice and sunburn and, all the extremes of the weather. And so that wasn't necessarily good for them, even though we kind of want to remember it as being good. So the modern production takes that factor out. We do raise pigs in confinement, and there's some great advantages to that, because then we can control their environment so they're not too cold and they're not too hot. And we take them away from the dirt where they're exposed to parasites, which of course aren't good for them and ultimately not good for us if we're raising them for food. So there are a lot of things that we can control. We can control the amount of food that they eat, so we don't have anybody that's raised pigs in a group knows there's always one big bossy sow that goes around and torments all the rest of them and gets more than her fair share of feed. And by having them in confinement and in individual feeding situations, we can control those kinds of things. So it's maybe not as picturesque as some people remember, but it's a much more, I guess, a much fairer way for the individual pigs to be raised.
The government regulates all products that make it to your table, as well as the products that are used to grow and protect them.
The allocation of water resources is governed by the Kansas Water Appropriation Act. That was passed in 1945, and so there were uses in place before then, and they were brought into that appropriation system. But since then, water is essentially allowed to be developed under a Water Appropriation Act. The Kansas Water Appropriation Act essentially says all the water of the state is for the use of the public of the state. A water right is essentially a right to use that public resource, and they're applied for to the Division of Water Resources. You have a specific use that you want to make of the water. It has a specific point of diversion, place of use, quantities and rates that are allowed to put that water to use.
Pesticides are seriously regulated. In Kansas, the Kansas Department of Agriculture is the first line of regulation for the state of Kansas. And then going up the ladder, the federal government has the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency.
At the federal level, the federal government registers the pesticides, and all pesticide products have to be sent to the EPA along with the documentation for the testing that's been done, and the EPA will accept the label that's submitted by the registrants based on all of the data that goes with that product.
What you have working from the ground up, the insecticide companies discover a new compound with potential of killing a pest and not killing non-target organisms. So they will start developing that. They pass that around to their own folks. Every company, the Bayer, Syngenta, Monsanto's, DuPonts of the world, they have their own section of regulators within that section that follows the EPA laws very closely on looking at their trials and making sure their products are going to conform so that eventually they can be registered by a state agency and a federal government. And they have to gather so much data to be registered or to be approved by the federal government.
I know here at Kansas State University, we work with a lot of companies. Once they've passed a pesticide, specifically we work with insecticides, through internal testing to make sure that it's relatively safe, kind of develop timelines of how long it is before you treat, before a consumer can eat the material, things like that. They will give the materials to us and we take it out in a field setting and test it for, not only its efficacy, but for safety from an environmental standpoint.
They want independent data, so the companies hire us to provide independent data also. And we submit that to the company. Then if it is a product that is going to be registered, if it looks like it has the potential of making the company a lot of money, they will go ahead and submit the data to the EPA. The EPA then will register that product. They'll notify the state, the Kansas Department of Agriculture, that this product is registered. The Department of Agriculture in Kansas then will decide the use in Kansas, if it's going to be registered or not. And conversely, if there's a product in Kansas that has been banned by the EPA, or if there's a product that they want to use differently than is on the federal label, the Kansas Department of Agriculture also has the ability to get a 24C, a special local needs registration, which we have done that in the last couple of years.
The pesticide and fertilizer program here at the Department of Agriculture is made up of a staff at the Topeka office. We also have 14 field inspectors that cover different geographical areas of the state.
The Food and Drug Administration, or in this case Kansas Department of Agriculture, looks over our shoulder on this. We scout these reports written down, what we saw specifically, what insect, what pest, be it a weed or whatever fungus that we're after. We write that down, we document that we found that, we document that the plants at a given stage, and at this stage and at this time we should see an application. And then we'll choose a herbicide.
When we actually find problems in the field, whether that is from drift or misuse or not following labeled directions, we do an investigation of the use of that pesticide. Sometimes sampling is involved, sometimes checking of documents is involved. We'll build a complete case out of it, and when we review that case, we decide whether or not there was a violation of either state or federal law at that time. If it's a federal problem, we refer that on to the Environmental Protection Agency. If it's a state issue, we handle that in-house.
The whole system requires that I carry insurance so that I pay for, have the ability to pay for, before I ever go to the field, any damage I might cause, or might be caused relative to whatever I applied, or how I applied it.
If you're using a restricted use pesticide and it's not on your property and you don't have a commercial applicator license, there are criminal penalties involved. The Kansas Department of Agriculture at any time can come down, take a tank mix out of your tank that you're utilizing, take it in and have it analyzed to see what you're using. They can, fine you.
Some of the things that can happen based on misuse or improper record keeping would be an administrative warning letter, or what we also call a summary order, which is written that documents the violation of the law. We also send civil penalties out not to individuals, to companies that have violated the Kansas pesticide law. From there, we can move on to either suspending an individual's certification, or we can actually suspend or revoke a pesticide business license from a company. If it goes any farther than that, we occasionally will have to get either a district attorney or a county attorney involved if we have a real difficult situation.
The only reason is safety, food safety issue. If you have some pathogen, it will be very difficult to control in raw milk. That's the reason we pasteurize the milk, in order to get rid of those pathogens and make the milk more safe for the consumers. And the nutritive value during pasteurization, the loss of nutritive value during pasteurization is negligible. There are certain heat-induced changes in milk, but they are negligible.
We'll heat it up to at least 161 degrees and hold it for 15 seconds. That's what legal pasteurization is on an HTST, high temp short time pasteurizer. Ours is a little bit higher and a little bit longer time, but as long as you at least meet those thresholds of 161 for 15 seconds, it's legally pasteurized. We get inspected 4 times a year on how, with that equipment. It's called an equipment check. They time it and they check the temperatures on all the thermometers to verify that we are pasteurizing at the temperature we say we are on the recorder, as well as the time that it stays in the machine, because we need to make sure that it stays in the holding tubes for at least 15 seconds. So we get checked on that. All cheeses that are currently being made in the United States in the commercial industry are being pasteurized. The ice cream mix, before we freeze it, has been pasteurized in a vat pasteurizer.
The Kansas Department of Agriculture requires us to have a nursery license. They come out and inspect our sod periodically. They inspect it to make sure that it's weed-free and that it does not contain any noxious weeds, that we wouldn't want to be shipping any noxious weeds to town. We also get inspected for pests. We wouldn't be wanting to take different pests from one part of the state to another. Missouri, since we're in Kansas City, we're also required to be inspected by Missouri to ship sod out of state as well. We're required to have a chemical applicator's license. We're also required to have a chemigation license. The state comes out and inspects our chemigation equipment because we're actually injecting fertilizer into the water in very small doses as it's coming out of the well. And they inspect all of our equipment to ensure that none of that would backflow back into the water system to protect us all.
There you have it. I hope you've enjoyed this season as much as we have. For the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.